Welcome back to the Life Support Podcast. Thanks for listening. We have our guest, Rachael Mayer. She reminded me like John Mayer, no relation though, here to talk to us about social media and mental health. Before we get started, just a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button and maybe on topic for today, like us on, is it the Facebook, the Gram, the TikTok, and whatever else those kids are using today. But just please follow us and subscribe when you can. With that, let's go ahead and get started. So, Rachael, can you introduce yourself? And that's your name, where you're from, what you like to do when you're not working, what you do when you are working?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Rachael Mayer, and I'm kind of from all over. My dad was in the Navy, so growing up, I moved around a lot. But I've been living here in Idaho on and off for the last 15 years. I call this home. Currently here in Boise, and I love it. When I'm not working, I really enjoy taking walks outside. I've been trying to commit to taking a walk every single day in the morning, regardless of how cold it is. So been wearing lots of layers here in the Idaho winter. I also really enjoy knitting, and I just finished my very first sweater. It's not like a great fit, but it does exist, and I made it, so it
That's
definitely
great.
counts.
Congratulations.
Thank
Yes.
you. When I am working, I do a lot of social media work. So I actually do the social media for CU and all of our different clients, as well as thinking of different social strategies and safe social media tips for everyone.
Awesome. I thought you were going to say, and I'm wearing that sweater now. And I was going to be like, oh no, we're going to lose Rachael because she's going to start professionally making sweaters.
Yeah, no.
Right.
If
Well,
only
Don't
I'm
go
not that
anywhere,
advanced.
Rachael.
on topic with your current area focus, for those who haven't been reading their social media news or maybe it mysteriously disappeared from their news feed, in the last month or two, we've seen a lot of coverage around the Seattle School District lawsuit against TikTok and Meta. Can you give us a quick overview of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad you asked this question because I think it's going to set us up really nicely for the rest of our conversation. And also to give us kind of some background on these platforms. So, the suit names Meta, which is comprised of Instagram and Facebook. It also includes Google, Snapchat, and ByteDance, which is the company behind TikTok. And the complaint alleges that the school district and its students have been harmed by social media's negative effects on youth mental health. And that these companies designed their platforms intentionally to grow users and grow their user base, using methods known both in psychology and neurophysiology to really get users to go on their platforms and then stay on their platforms. So essentially, the lawsuit is alleging that social media companies are prioritizing profit over the mental health and safety of its users. And they're maximizing that profit through advertising specifically. And the suit is, drawing these connections between high social media usage of young folks and then also this um, increased prevalence of stress and anxiety in that same population. And, the argument on the other side is that these companies are just using, product marketing where they're crafting messages to promote a product that fulfills a need. And, some marketing professionals in, the marketing world, they even use the term addiction around product marketing, that you want to addict your customers and do really everything in your power to do so in order to maximize that profit and demand for your product. And I find that really problematic for a number of reasons. But even just looking at it and, with a black and white lens, we do, in fact, limit addicting, products and situations. We have age limits on tobacco, casinos, alcohol. I do not think that banning social media for all children, youth, and teens is the right answer. In fact, I think it's actually a really bad idea. But I think that we're doing a real disservice to our communities and the current and future generations to treat social media like we would anything else. Because it's not like anything else. These platforms are a culmination of community. They also, they function as learning platforms, a means of communication, hubs for creativity, and then a place for us all to gather even when we're far apart, which I think a lot of us found to be really comforting, especially during the height of the pandemic. So I don't know that limiting social media is really the long-term answer, but something that I do think could be helpful is a review of our data privacy laws. So currently in the United States Congress, legislation has been introduced that would prohibit anyone from downloading TikTok on U.S. devices. So TikTok is owned by a Chinese company, ByteDance, and there have been all of these international concerns really about the platform's data collection practices and then also the possibility of ByteDance sharing that information with the Chinese government. And to be clear, all social media platforms gather and collect this data. The difference is because TikTok is owned by a Chinese company, it's subject to Chinese national security, which then in turn demands that all data be shared. Whereas in US companies like Facebook and Instagram, companies are not mandated to turn over that information without a warrant and subpoena. And the reason I bring this up is that if we were really truly concerned about privacy and who can access information about us, we pass data privacy laws to kind of limit the degree to which these companies, including TikTok, can harvest, collect, and then use and store our data. So, for example, the European Union has a very different approach to data privacy. In fact, actually, in their charter, they include data protection as a fundamental right to all citizens. And so, as such, they have really strict rules governing that data. And here in the US, we take a very hands off approach that favors all of the companies that collect that data and use it. And so that means that these companies can really target us based on our actions we take on our phones. So I'm sure many listeners have noticed that they might Google something on a browser and, on their phone and then switch over to the Instagram app. And all of a sudden, they're getting ads for something that they searched on their browser, something similar to those products they searched for. In the way that this really circles all the way back to Seattle Public School lawsuit is that there are currently no rules governing the collection of data from youth. And this means that we're even more susceptible to all of those addicting properties of social media because everything they do on their phone is really used against them. So while data protection laws wouldn't solve everything, they would at least limit some of the content that's being seen. And, the good news is that data privacy laws are being considered for youth. So a law in California was just signed that will take effect in 2024 that will significantly limit any business online that is accessed by anyone under the age of 18. We still need widespread change to our data laws. And I would argue we really shouldn't limit these laws to children and youth, but they should apply to everyone, including adults, because we ourselves are really not immune from these issues.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Rachel. Like, there's that fine line of the addiction and product marketing and psychology, right? That you
Yeah.
learn about when you're at school, right? But then you brought in a great point about privacy. And I think even, there's, we have a privacy section on this social media tool, but
Yeah.
nobody really understands it, right? Like, what am I clicking if I click this box as a no or a yes? So I do think there needs to be a lot more education. So I agree completely with you and the privacy laws that are needed. But kind of pivoting a little bit,
Mhm.
as someone who is in social media, but talking about mental health every day with Sidu, what's your take on mental health and social media?
I love social media. I think that the way it can connect us is amazing, which is a great thing that I love social media, right? Since I do it for work. But we as humans, we are social creatures. So even if you are an introvert, some social action is really beneficial for your health. And we've seen that interaction can ease stress and anxiety, depression. It can boost your self worth, provide comfort and joy, prevent loneliness. It's incredibly important for us to build those really strong relationships with others. And I think where we can go wrong is if we only seek out those relationships online. And that's not to
Right.
minimize those online relationships. Yeah. They can be incredibly powerful and very real and beneficial. I think, especially when we're younger, it can feel like no one understands what we're going through. And maybe we live in a really small place, and that's actually true of our immediate environment and our surroundings. But because we have social media and online platforms, we can build a community of folks that we can relate to, that we share that information and advice and even just vent to each other. And we have that commonality that's bringing us together that maybe we can't find in our physical social interactions. So social media is powerful, but it should be used to subsidize, not replace the relationships we have in our life. And I think we really need to have really excellent boundaries with social media. So in remembering that those boundaries, that's a constant practice and not every day you're not gonna be perfect at it every day.
Yep.
So if that means you limit the amount of time you're on social media by setting a timer, that's great. I actually do that with TikTok. When I go on TikTok, I set a 15-minute timer, no
'Cause it's a
matter what I'm
it's a
doing.
rabbit hole when you get on
It is
TikTok.
such a rabbit hole. It's really easy to
Yeah.
just to
Yeah.
just keep scrolling. And you all of a sudden the hours pass by and you're like, what happened?
Yeah.
I really like timers. But maybe also, like if you're on social media and you see something that is like not making you feel good or, is upsetting you in some way, like maybe you take some phone free time and you go on a walk, like kind of just like let that tension leave your body. But I think like making sure that we build in those moments to our social media practice of like recovering from social media. And I think too, there are these kind of warning signs that we need to, maybe just keep in the back of our mind, keep an eye out for. So, number one, if we're feeling that we have like increased anxiety, depression, loneliness. Number two, that we're spending more time on social media than we are, with our friends and family, and that, those relationships are suffering. Number three, that we're like constantly comparing ourselves to others and like feeling like we're missing out. That's a huge one on social media. Number four, if you are feeling bullied, or don't like the way people are treating you online, like it's time for you to remove yourself from that space. Five, if you're engaging in, risky behavior for likes and comments and shares, I see that a lot with content that I see out there. Number six, you're prioritizing social media over self-care, like exercise, sleep, and mindfulness. So if you feel like really you can relate to any of these things, which to be fair, I can relate to some of those things, you really need to start setting some boundaries and start practicing better social media habits.
I mean, I love the fact that you set boundaries because we set up boundaries for people as well. So there's no reason
Yes.
why we can't do it for technology and social media.
It's funny, our tech person, Gen C, is like, okay, here's the technology piece of this. And then I think about it from like the youth mental health perspective of all of the things that you're listing, Rachel. I'm like, yeah, those are great things to do. They're also really hard for competent, self-actualizing, supported adults to do. And so thinking
Yes.
about how to translate that for youth and for kids that are really navigating that. I think that it's all really good advice and stuff to follow, but it makes me think about like, okay, there need to be those guardrails for youth because it's hard enough for adults.
That's really powerful, right? That this is just as hard for adults as it is for youth. And we have this commonality with people who are much younger than us that are also experiencing those things. And I think that like, why don't we come together and partner on this, right? Why don't we have these conversations about it? Because I think that that's really powerful too. Is being like, actually, I can relate to you because I like mysteriously spent an hour and a half on TikTok yesterday and like didn't make dinner,
Right.
So there are all of these things that I think we have
Yeah.
in common, that we're
Yeah.
all experiencing.
But and my thing, when you, and I guess this goes to my next question, how much can people control and what they're seeing and how it impacts them? But like, I remember before COVID, and I think we've gotten worse with social media after, because of COVID and all that. But I remember people used to turn off, they're like, I'm taking a break from social media, and then they turn off all of their logins. I haven't seen a lot of people do that lately, as much as I used to. So yeah, how much can people control what they're seeing and, so that way it doesn't impact them as much?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, Jen, like to your point, like I also haven't seen a lot of people just be like, hey, I'm taking a break from social media. And I think that it's become so integrated in our lives. It's really hard to like go cold turkey on something that you rely on every single day, that you use almost ritualistically. So I think that that's where those boundaries and like communication and education really comes into play. Because we do have a lot of power when we're using social media. Um, But you do have to have the right mindset in order to kind of harness or channel that power. So oftentimes, we go on social media when we want to decompress, and we end up just kind of mindlessly scrolling. And this is where we can get into dangerous territory. We've got to be thinking critically about what we're seeing online because the platforms, right, they're monitoring really our every move. So, for example, if a video comes up of like two people fighting on your feed, and you don't even have to like it or comment on it or share it, but if you pause in any way, that algorithm is going to show you more content like that because it noticed that you paused. So it's important to engage with content that resonates with you and your values. And this means, right, that we don't follow people who make us feel poorly and that we actively engage with that content that improves our quality of life. So, for example, my TikTok feed is mostly comprised of like comedians, recipe developers, and like unlikely animal friendships. I follow like a lot of farms, a lot of farms on TikTok.
Nice.
And it makes me really happy to see that type of content. But
Right.
every once in a while, even though like I very carefully curated my social media, I'll start to go down, like this rabbit hole where multiple videos in a row aren't really things that I want to see necessarily. And I'm like, how did I end up on this side of TikTok?
Right.
This dark side of TikTok. And in that moment, I think it's important to recognize it instead of just continuing to scroll. And like go to that search bar and type in something that you do want to see. And almost kind of like reset that algorithm in a way. And then really you're more of an active participant instead of just, passively consuming content.
I think that these are great recommendations for adults and probably for kids and minors too. But I think that they probably need some help. What control do kids and minors have, and what can their parents or their caregivers do to help support them with that healthy relationship with social media?
I was a youth many years ago, but I think that, one thing that is intergenerational is like disobedience. I really wouldn't recommend like banning social media or even trash talking it in front of like a minor that has an investment in it or enjoys those social platforms. Because if you do that, I think that they're a lot less likely to speak to you about what they're consuming online. And that's a pretty precarious place to be in as someone who cares about someone else. So I think that this is really where education and open communication play major roles. So if a young person who matters to you is on these platforms, you should take time to educate yourself on what they like and what they're seeing. And this could be a conversation and just asking to see what they're interested in, not as like an oversight sort of role, but just like, hey, can you show me more about TikTok or can you show me more about Instagram? And like, let that be a moment where they can really teach you. And they might actually really enjoy sharing that part of their life with you. And then like you also kind of get some insight on like what is luring them into those spaces. And I think hand in hand with this, it's super important to remember that not everything we see online is true. And adults are just as guilty of this as youth are. So if you see someone make a statement that doesn't sound like doesn't sound like an opinion, but rather a fact, you maybe find some other sources. And do some minor research on the creators that you're consuming content from. So what gives them the authority to speak on the subject? And, they don't need a fancy degree. They don't need a certification. I think the really cool thing about social media is that we can create content based off of our own lived experiences. And that's really powerful. And it really levels that playing field. But I don't think should, mindlessly accept everything that we hear and see and have those conversations with teens and young adults so that they're also, critically thinking about those things. A few questions I like to ask myself and like to ask other people when we're talking about social media or when I see something provocative or interesting, how does the person know this? What would my perspective be different? Maybe if I were on the other side of this opinion, why are they posting this and why does it matter? And then, I think also in terms of like safety concerns about social media, it's really important to like let young people know that they should not share identifying information online with people that they haven't met in real life. So you never give out your address, your email, or your phone number. And adults should never be asking you for help. Should never ask you to keep a secret from your parents. And if you're in communication with someone online that, it seems weird, you should trust your gut and get a second opinion from an adult you trust. And, I think in terms of like, you know, the nitty gritty tech side of like your phone tracking you, you can turn on geolocation services so that the app can, it's not going to tag your physical location when you post, but those instructions really differ depending on whether or not you're using, an Android or an Apple device. So I'd recommend just kind of Googling that for those step by step instructions. You should also check the permissions on your apps to make sure that your content is as private or as public as you would like it to be. And that also differs per platform, and it is constantly changing as those platforms update. So, giving that a Google is also a really great idea too. One thing to note with that though is that some apps reset all of their privacy preferences when they update. So if you have automatic updates turned on, you might not realize that that has happened, and all that work you did to set your privacy settings could have been flipped back. So if you're really concerned about privacy and data collection, I'd recommend you give those preferences like a glance every once in a while. And this is just like another way to illustrate like why we need better data protection privacy laws. Um, there are third-party apps too that are social media blockers or filters that you can use on social media platforms, but I haven't used those, so I can't really speak to their efficacy. But I think it's a good thing to remember that the platforms themselves are, have a 13 plus age restriction on them. But just because they say it's fine doesn't mean that youth won't see something on social media that they're not ready for. And so I think that really circles back, like there's kind of like always these ways to circumvent restrictions that we put on things. And sometimes by restricting them, we make them even more appealing, unfortunately. So I think it's like, right, knowing the student or the youth that you're interacting with and kind of like what their personality is and like what might work for them. But also to make sure that you have that open dialogue with the kids in your life to make sure that if they see something that they don't understand or they're upset over, or even something that they really like, right, that they're sharing that information with you so that you can tackle those issues together.
I already am hatching a plan for Rachel M to come talk to my son and daughter when the time comes for them
Yeah.
to start accessing. Yeah, that this is really good.
Oh,
God.
good. I'm glad it's helpful.
No, that's a scary conversation, Rachel. I totally
is.
get it. It can be nerve-wracking, I think, for parents because, some kids you tell them no, and they're like, "Oh, really?" And then they're just gonna go and do
Yeah.
it. So it's just like, "Oh no, how do you have that?" Like, no big deal, but don't do this.
Mhm.
So yeah, those are great suggestions, Rachel. Thanks so much. How can social media be used to improve our mental health? Can it?
Mm. Yeah. Oh, I really love this question. And to answer it, I'm actually going to quote Lizzo. I think it was like last night or
Love
maybe,
it, love it. That
yeah,
was the
yeah.
best.
Okay, good. I think it was like last night or maybe the night before that she accepted her Grammy
Yep.
and she dedicated it to Prince. And she said she committed to only making positive music after he passed. So I think we should all be a little bit more like Lizzo and choose positivity and kindness when we're using social media. And that doesn't mean that we don't talk about hard things and that we don't engage in content that is challenging. But rather, when we consume those things, we find the positive in it. And that could mean that we're experiencing growth or a different perspective and have maybe, shifted our outlook. But I think it's important to remember that we might not be able to change policy or the world in a single day, but we can control our reactions to the world that we live in. And oftentimes, mindset is really a crucial tool to that. So when we're on social media, right, we go back to those things that we know that we really enjoy, the content that supports us and lifts us up, and it, isn't making us feel negative about ourselves. And really curating our social media so that it works for us instead of against us.
I love that. Yeah. And when she said that, I was like, if
Yeah.
everyone would practice that, right, the world would be a better
Yes.
place. So it's great. Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, I can't think of a better way to end than with Lizzo. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I know. I wish we could get
Yeah.
copyrights right at the end so we can play her
Yeah.
music. That'd be great.
Yeah.
I would say the next best thing is us singing Lizzo, but I would be involved in that,
Oh,
which means that would not be a good
No,
thing.
you don't want me to
Um,
sing. Yeah, no.
yeah, yeah. Well,
yeah.
I guess that's where we can end life support, listeners, is with the promise that we will not sing, at least on this podcast. But we so appreciate our time with Rachel Mayer and just the conversation around how we can intentionally use social media as adults, and then also how we can be good stewards and gatekeepers for the younger folks in our lives. So thank you so much, Rachel, for taking the time to chat with us. Again, thanks all for listening. Be sure to catch a new episode every other Thursday and subscribe, like, follow on whatever your preferred social media is. Rachel is putting it out there. So would love for you to support us and follow us. Life Support is a podcast developed by CHU with the support of the ISOS grant, where we talk to providers, experts, and others about their experiences with health and the systems that create it. This podcast music is written and performed by Anthony Leon. The show is also produced by Anthony. For more information, visit us on the web at chu.org and remember to follow us on your favorite podcast app. Thanks, everybody.